Welcome everyone, my name is David Rocha. I am a Partner Solutions Architect at AWS, and this is an AWS Launch Wizard for SAP demonstration. At AWS, we believe you should treat your SAP solutions as code. This includes your servers, network, storage, and operating systems. AWS Launch Wizard is a service that empowers customers and partners to do just that without the requirements to learn a new programming language. Using AWS Launch Wizard for SAP allows you to deploy your SAP environment rapidly while maintaining consistency across all of your deployments. Additionally, it allows you to know if your system's configuration is drifted from your documented and tested configuration. AWS Launch Wizard for SAP infrastructure walks you through selecting SAP certified instances. It creates the networking rules and the correct storage configuration and captures all of these settings in a saved configuration that you can edit. And most importantly, it's all done while ensuring you're following the best practices from SAP, AWS, and SUSE. You can access the AWS Launch Wizard through the AWS console, and there's several deployment options. And of course, we're going to select the SAP option. Once you select the SAP option, it will take you to a screen where you can see your past deployments and an option to create a deployment. We're going to select the option to create a deployment. So we'll see an information screen letting us know that the AWS Launch Wizard creates an IAM role in our account and grants the AWS Launch Wizard service access to the role to set up the services on our behalf. We are on step 2 to find the infrastructure. First option is we'll now name the deployment. It must be a unique name. We have the option to provide a description. There's also an option to enable rollback on failed deployments, which means Launch Wizard will delete the AWS services it creates if it encountered any errors during the launch. You can also select to export the configuration and create an AWS Service Catalog product. The AWS Service Catalog is an IT service catalog that an AWS organization can publish for approved IT services. You'll need to add the S3 file path to store your configuration files as well. The next configuration is tags. Tags can help you manage, identify, organize, and filter resources. If you have a standard tagging convention, you can add those tags, and the AWS Launch Wizard will add those tags to any of the AWS services it creates. All right, so I have added the S3 file path, and what I will do is I will add a key value pair of environment and demo so that any of the services that get created, it will add that tag. We're at the infrastructure SAP landscape section. I'm selecting the option to create a configuration. If I had a configuration saved, I could select and apply that saved configuration. I will name my configuration. I'll also select the environment as a non-production environment. And by selecting the deployment as a non-production environment, it will take that into account when we make the Amazon EC2 instance type selection. Right below that, I can select the key pair name, and I can choose to create a key pair or select one that I already created. The next section is on the VPC or networking environment. You can choose to create a VPC from this screen. It will take you to a CloudFormation wizard and walk you through the steps. I suggest that you already have a VPC created to save you from having to go back and forth between the AWS console screens for the VPC setup and the AWS Launch Wizard SAP setup. The VPC requirements are that you have both private and public subnets across 2 availability zones if you plan an HA environment, or 1 private and public subnet in a single availability zone for a single deployment. But in both scenarios, you must have internet access. The next section is security groups. Security groups act as a virtual firewall for your Amazon EC2 instances. You can choose to create new security groups or use existing groups. If you select new groups, the groups will be created, rules will be added, and your new instances will be able to communicate with each other. There's an additional configuration option. You can specify a site range or IP address. and that will be added to the security group to allow communication from your new instances to the added CIDR or IP address. So remember the previous checkbox stating that your subnets are required to have a path to the internet? If you have a corporate policy that requires proxy servers for internet traffic, you can define your proxy server IP address. And the proxy server will be added to the rules that will route internet traffic through the proxy server from your instances. The last section in defining your infrastructure covers a few settings. You can set your time zone for the servers that are created. AWS enables EBS encryption by default through AWS Launch Wizard for SAP. And if you have an EBS KMS customer master key created already, you can select that or allow AWS Launch Wizard to create one for you. SAP Landscape Settings is where you can set your group ID. AWS recommends you use the same group ID across your different systems that are part of the same transport domain. And by doing this, you're ensuring that the transport file systems are mounted correctly across your deployments. Okay, looking at step 3. AWS Launch Wizard currently supports the following application types with SAP. It can set up a single instance, distributed instance, or a multi-availability zone for HA. AWS Launch Wizard can also set up NetWeaver application tier, or it can set up an SAP HANA database with an optional HANA database install. In this demo, I'm selecting SAP HANA. The following options allow you to add the HANA SID, HANA instance number, as well as selecting the type of storage used for the different HANA volumes. The HANA software install allows me to select the option to install SAP HANA software or to only provision the AWS infrastructure. I will select yes to install the HANA software, and since I'm choosing to install the HANA software, I'm required to have added the HANA install media to an S3 bucket. For the install to complete successfully, the account must have access to the S3 bucket, and the name of the S3 bucket must start with Launch Wizard. After I input the S3 location, I'll need to add the HANA password. The password requirements are listed on the screen and they follow SAP recommendations. I do want to point out that AWS Launch Wizard will test the password to ensure that it meets those requirements. AWS Backend Agent for SAP HANA is an available option as a backup solution for the SAP workloads running on your deployed Amazon EC2 instances. It is an SAP certified backup and restore application for SAP HANA workloads. The first checkbox explains that if you want to deploy the AWS backend agent, it removes the requirement for EBS backup volumes. If you still want to provision the EBS volumes, you can do so by selecting the box. And the last checkbox is a preference to continue with the deployment if an issue is encountered while installing the AWS backend agent. Since this is a demo environment, I deselected the AWS backend agent. Step 4 is configure the deployment model for SAP HANA. You have 3 choices for SAP HANA. The first is a single instance deployment for OLTP workloads. The second is deploying a HANA database for OLAP workloads at a scale-out cluster. And the third choice is a high availability option deployed across 2 availability zones. We're going to select the high availability deployment. In the instance details, you can select an SAP certified operating system for AWS deployments and have the option to purchase using the AWS Marketplace or using a bring your own subscription model. In our demonstration, we're going to select SLES for SAP 15 SP3 from the Marketplace. We can define the instance details for the primary and secondary instance that are being created by Launch Wizard. I am going to go ahead and accept the defaults. I do want to touch on the overlay IP address though. The overlay IP address provides a similar capability that a floating IP address provides for a cluster. All network traffic will flow to the overlay IP address, and SAP HANA will respond to that network traffic. The overlay IP address must also have an IP address that is not part of the CIDR block associated to the VPC. So in our case, we're adding a 192 IP address. For a deep dive, check out SUSE session type 1087, where we can discuss the components of an HA cluster. Each cluster must also have a pacemaker tag name, and the pacemaker tag name must be unique. The next section is instance sizing, and this is where I can select an instance size based on my infrastructure requirements. I can choose it based off of the physical architecture, or I can look at the number of SAPs that an instance will provide me. After I define my instances, I can now review my settings. And this is where you can review all of the inputs that you added with AWS Launch Wizard and make any edits if you need to. We launched the deployment and we're then taken to the AWS Launch Wizard console. In the AWS Launch Wizard console, I can now review the deployment events and the configuration summary. I can also look at the provisioning status for each of those items that are being created. Thank you for watching today's AWS Launch Wizard demonstration. If you have any questions, please head over to the AWS SUSE booth and you can submit your questions to the team. Thank you.